At our quiet Sunday family check-in, I noticed something strange before anyone even spoke. The chairs were arranged differently, as if they had prepared for a meeting I wasn't meant to lead. My son and daughter-in-law sat across from me with matching polite smiles, the kind that never reached their eyes. I set my mug down gently, trying to ignore the uneasy ripple running through my chest. It was supposed to be a simple check-in, something we'd started after my husband passed. A way to stay connected, or at least that's what I believed. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and let me know where you're watching from. That morning, the house felt too still. I'd opened the windows to let in the mild breeze, letting it carry the familiar scents of cinnamon and coffee through the living room. I even baked a small blueberry loaf, the same recipe my husband used to love on slow weekends. I told myself it would be a pleasant day, a peaceful one. But when they arrived, 5 minutes early, both holding tablets and avoiding small talk, I felt the air shift. My daughter-in-law was the first to speak. She folded her hands neatly, her wedding ring catching the sunlight. "Before we start, there's something we need to review," she said, tapping her tablet. My son looked down, not at me, and certainly not at the blueberry loaf cooling on the counter. Then she turned the screen toward me. "The deed," she said lightly, too lightly. "We updated some things." For a moment, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Lines of text, a seal, a signature, mine but not mine. Then I saw it. Where my name used to be, there was nothing. Just a blank space, as if I'd never been there. I felt my pulse slow instead of quicken. A strange calm wrapped around me, the kind that comes when a truth finally steps out of the shadows. I looked at both of them, waiting for one of them to say it was a misunderstanding, a clerical error, something harmless. But they only watched me, expectant. My son finally cleared his throat. "It'll make things easier for everyone," he murmured. "You won't have to worry about paperwork anymore." Easier. For everyone. I nodded slowly, my fingers resting lightly on the edge of the screen. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just sat back in my chair and let the weight of the moment settle around us like dust. The house that my husband and I had paid off over 35 years. The home where we raised him. The place where every wall carried a memory, and they'd taken my name off as if it were a smudge to be wiped clean. "I see," I said quietly. That was all. But inside, something cold and steady began to take shape, something they clearly never expected. They thought this would end with my silence. They had no idea what they had just awakened. The silence after their announcement followed me long after they left. When the door closed behind them, the house felt heavier than usual, as if the walls themselves were trying to understand what had just happened. I stood in the living room for a long moment, hands resting on the back of the chair I'd been sitting in, letting the quiet settle around me. The blueberry loaf was still on the counter, untouched, the glaze beginning to harden. I wrapped it carefully and placed it in the refrigerator, though I knew I wouldn't be eating it. I walked through the house the way I used to when my husband was still alive, slowly, pausing in doorways, letting memories breathe. The afternoon sun filtered through the blinds, striping the hardwood floors with thin bands of gold. His reading chair still sat angled toward the window, as if waiting for him to return with a book tucked under his arm. I ran my hand along the back of it the way I had countless times, tracing the softened fabric. The calm from earlier didn't fade. It settled deeper. I stood in the hallway, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the wall clock. 12 years of those Sunday check-ins meant to keep us close, and today I finally saw them clearly for what they had become, appointments to manage me. Keep me predictable, keep me quiet. I made myself a cup of tea, watching the steam rise in thin curls. My husband used to say, "You can tell more about a person from what they choose not to say." Today, my son had chosen not to look at me. My daughter-in-law had chosen to smile. Both choices spoke loudly. As I carried the cup to the kitchen table, I noticed the folder they had left, neatly placed beside my mug. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Not yet. Instead, I slid it aside and sat down with the tea warming my palms. Outside, a few neighbors walked their dogs, stopping to chat in the street the way people do on calm Sundays. Everything looked normal. But something in me had shifted. After a while, I stood and washed the cup, letting the warm water run over my fingers. My reflection in the window above the sink looked almost unfamiliar, calm, composed, but sharpened in a way I couldn't ignore. I dried the cup, set it upside down on the rack, and walked to my bedroom. Inside the top drawer of my nightstand were old documents, insurance papers, letters, the original mortgage agreement, things my husband and I had kept tucked away. I pulled them out, placing them carefully on the bedspread. The edges were soft with age, but the ink was still bold. I sat down and started reading, piece by piece, not rushing, not shaking. There, in my husband's handwriting on the corner of an old envelope, were the words he wrote the year we paid off the house. Just in case. Everything stays yours. I pressed my fingertips to the ink, feeling the faint texture of the pen marks. They thought removing my name would be simple. Clean, quiet. But they forgot something. I've lived a long life. I've seen storms. I've buried the only man who ever truly knew me. And after all that, there is very little left in this world that can scare me. Certainly not a blank line where my name used to be. The next morning, I woke before sunrise, the house still wrapped in that early blue light that makes everything look softer than it really is. I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, listening to the quiet. No footsteps, no breathing beside me, just the creak of old floorboards adjusting to the cold. I slipped my feet into my slippers and reached for the stack of documents I'd left neatly arranged on the nightstand the night before. I carried them to the kitchen and set them on the table. The folder my son and daughter-in-law had brought sat there too, perfectly aligned with the placemat, as if someone had measured it. Their neatness always had a way of making things feel final. I didn't touch it. Instead, I made coffee, the same way I had for decades. 2 scoops, slow pour, gentle stir. The smell filled the kitchen, warm and familiar, settling my thoughts. I sat down, wrapped both hands around the mug, and opened the oldest envelope first. My husband's handwriting curved across the page, steady and confident. Even now, years later, it made the house feel a little less empty. Halfway through reading, a soft knock interrupted the quiet. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, I found Mrs. Talbot from next door standing on the porch, bundled in her heavy coat, her breath fogging in the cold air. "I saw your kids leave yesterday," she said gently. "Everything all right?" I must have hesitated too long because her expression softened even more. I just nodded and invited her in, grateful for the company. She sat at the table with me, hands folded in her lap. "They didn't stay long," she added, almost carefully. "No," I said, "they didn't." She glanced at the folder I hadn't opened yet but didn't ask. Mrs. Talbot had lived long enough to recognize when a person was carrying something fragile. We talked for a while. Gardens, the weather, little things that kept the morning from feeling too heavy. When she finally stood to leave, she paused at the doorway. "If you need anything at all, you knock on my door. I mean that." I nodded, watching her walk back across the yard, her boots leaving small prints in the frost. After she left, the house grew quiet again. I returned to the kitchen, stared at the folder, then slid it to the far edge of the table. I wasn't ready to see their signatures stacked against mine. Instead, I opened another old document, the original property tax letter from the first year we owned the house. My husband had written notes in the margins, calculations, reminders, a small doodle of a tree in the corner. He'd always wanted to plant an oak in the backyard. The young one he planted is tall now, its branches brushing against the siding whenever the wind picks up. I looked toward the window, catching a glimpse of that tree swaying gently. This house wasn't just walls and beams. It was the life we built, the life we paid for, the life I maintained long after he was gone. I set the papers down and finally looked at the folder again. "Easier for everyone," my son had said. Maybe it was time I saw exactly what everyone had decided on my behalf. I reached for the folder, my hand steady, not because I wasn't afraid, but because I had lived too long to let fear make decisions for me. I opened the folder slowly, the paper inside giving off that faint chemical smell of something too new, too recently printed. The first page was a summary, cold lines, dates, signatures, all neatly typed. My name appeared only once, in a small note at the bottom, former owner. Seeing those 2 words didn't sting the way I expected. It landed quietly, like something I already knew deep down. Still, I traced the letters with my thumb for a moment before turning the page. There were signatures, my son's, bold and rushed, my daughter-in-law's, elegant and practiced. Then one that was supposed to be mine. It wasn't. The loops were too wide, the angle wrong, the pressure uneven. My hand had signed countless forms in my lifetime. I knew the way my pen moved. This wasn't it. The clock above the sink ticked loudly, each second landing like a soft tap against the truth. I closed the folder and placed both hands on top of it, grounding myself. My husband used to say that the worst betrayals weren't the loud ones. They were the quiet ones, slipped into conversations, folded into paperwork, tucked behind smiles. I stood and walked to the living room window. Outside, the morning had brightened, and the oak tree swayed gently in the breeze. I watched its branches lift and fall, as if nodding toward me, reminding me of all the seasons it had survived. I let the sight settle me. When I turned back to the living room, something caught my eye. On the bookshelf sat a small wooden box, our family safe box, the one we used for decades before the digital age took over. I opened it, half expecting it to be empty, but inside lay a stack of old legal documents, including the will my husband wrote before his final hospitalization. I unfolded it carefully, the paper soft with age. There it was, my name, clearly listed as the sole beneficiary of the house. No conditions, no replacements, no easier for everyone. I sat down, the old floor creaking softly beneath me. I didn't cry, I didn't tremble. I just breathed, letting the truth expand slowly in my chest like a quiet dawn. After a while, I returned to the kitchen and made another cup of coffee. I sat with the warm mug between my palms, letting the heat seep into my fingers. The folder still sat on the table, its edges too straight, too clean, compared to the worn papers of my husband's handwriting. My phone buzzed, a message from my son. Hope the meeting wasn't too stressful, just trying to help. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. Help. I set the phone down face down and opened the drawer where I kept the old address book. My husband's attorney, Mr. Donovan, was still listed near the front. He was older now, retired, but he had always told me, if anything ever looks off, you call me. I mean it. I slid the book back into the drawer and closed it gently. I wasn't ready to make that call yet, but the possibility sat there, steady and certain, like a door I could walk through whenever I chose. I picked up the folder again, not to read it, but to feel its weight. It wasn't heavy, not compared to everything my family had placed on my shoulders over the years. I placed it flat on the table, smoothed the edges, and whispered to the empty room, "We'll sort this out." And I meant it. The rest of the day passed in small, quiet motions. I folded laundry, I watered the plants, I swept the kitchen floor even though it didn't really need it. When the mind is heavy, the hands look for work. It's something my mother used to say, and it's still true now, all these years later. But by late afternoon, I found myself standing in the hallway again, staring at the wooden box that held my husband's will. The knowledge inside it felt like a steady pulse beneath the lid. A soft knock startled me. When I opened the door, I saw a familiar face. Evelyn, my neighbor from across the street. She held a small container in her hands, still warm. "I made extra chicken soup," she said. "Thought you might want some." Her voice carried that gentle concern people try to hide, but never really can. I invited her inside. She stepped in slowly, glancing at the papers spread on the kitchen table, but not asking. She'd seen enough in her own life to know what it looks like when someone is trying to hold themselves together. We sat at the table, and I ladled soup into bowls. The steam curled upward, carrying the scent of thyme and slow-cooked vegetables. For a few minutes, we talked about simple things, the weather, her grandchildren, the neighbor who always forgot trash day. It helped, the way ordinary conversation can steady a person. But eventually, her gaze drifted again to the folder. "Rough morning?" she asked softly. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I smoothed the edge of the napkin beside my bowl. "They made changes to the house," I finally said. "Without me." Evelyn's eyes tightened in a way that wasn't quite surprise, just sadness mixed with understanding. "People forget who built the foundation they're standing on," she murmured. I appreciated that she didn't press for details. Some truths need space before they can be spoken out loud. When she stood to leave, she placed her hand gently over mine. "You're stronger than you think," she said, "and you're not as alone as they want you to feel." After she left, the house felt a little warmer, the way it does when someone leaves kindness behind. I sat at the table again, looking at the 2 stacks of papers, the new, bright folder and the worn, handwritten will that still smelled faintly of old cedar. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my granddaughter, Lily. "Grandma, are you home? Can I stop by?" I typed back, "Of course, sweetheart." 20 minutes later, she walked through the door wearing her college sweatshirt, hair pulled into a loose braid. She hugged me tight, longer than usual. Then she pulled back and studied my face the way only someone who truly loves you can. "Dad said the meeting went well," she said carefully. I smiled, a small, tired one. "Did he?" She sighed and sat across from me. "Grandma, he looked guilty. He wouldn't meet my eyes." That sentence sat in the air between us, like a truth neither of us wanted, but both recognized. Lily reached for the old will, brushing her fingers lightly across the page. "Grandpa always kept his promises," she whispered. "Dad knows that." Her voice didn't hold anger, just disappointment deep enough to echo. I closed the will gently and placed my hand over hers. "It's all right," I said, though we both knew it wasn't. She squeezed my hand. "Tell me what you need, Grandma. I'll help." For the first time that day, something in my chest loosened. A small relief, quiet but real. Maybe my name had been lifted off a piece of paper. But it wasn't erased from the people who still saw me. After Lily left, the house fell into that deep evening quiet I knew so well. I washed the soup bowls, dried them by hand, and set them upside down on the rack. The simple rhythm steadied me. When the dishes were done, I wiped the counter, turned off the kitchen light, and walked back to the table where the 2 sets of papers still waited, one honest, one not. I sat down again, not to reread anything, but to let the day settle. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft tick of the hallway clock, the faint rustle of tree branches outside, everything felt calm in a way that didn't match what was happening in my life. But sometimes calm is just a surface over something colder. My phone buzzed once more. A message from my daughter-in-law this time. "Hope you're processing all the changes. It's really for the best." For the best. I locked the phone without replying. I leaned back in my chair and let the quiet stretch. The folder on the table seemed to watch me, waiting. Finally, I reached for it again, more slowly than before. I flipped through the pages until I reached the one with the forged signature. I stared at it for a long time, not to memorize it, but to acknowledge what it meant. Someone I loved had put my name on a line I never touched. I closed the folder and stood, my joints stiff from sitting too long. I walked down the hallway to my husband's old study. The door stuck slightly, just like it always had. Inside, everything was exactly as he left it. The oak desk, the small lamp with the pull chain, the worn rug beneath the chair. I switched on the lamp. Warm yellow light filled the room. In the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of old bank statements, was a binder my husband kept meticulously for years. Manuals, receipts, dated notes on every improvement we ever made to the house. I opened it and flipped through each page. There, in his neat handwriting, were the costs of repairs, the date the roof was replaced, even the day we planted the oak tree outside. At the very front, clipped to the inside pocket, was a small handwritten note addressed to me. "Keep this close. It's your protection, just in case." I sat down slowly, the old desk chair creaking beneath me. I held the note between my fingers, feeling the indentations from his pen. Even now, long gone, he was still trying to take care of me. I closed the binder and returned to the kitchen. I set it beside the old will, forming a quiet little stack of truth. Then I placed the new folder, the one with the forged signature, beside them. Truth and lies, side by side. I looked at them without fear, without rush, without anger. Instead, something else settled in me. Something steady, like a beam driven deep into the ground. I gathered all 3 sets of papers, slid them into a large envelope, and tucked it into my handbag. Then I hung the bag on the chair closest to the door. Not because I planned to leave right away, but because I wanted everything ready when the moment came. The house was dim now, the last bit of daylight slipping away. I turned off the lamp, turned off the lights, and stood in the doorway of the living room. The oak tree outside rustled softly, almost as if it were whispering its agreement. I didn't know yet what my next step would be. But for the first time since the meeting, I felt the path forming under my feet. The next morning, sunlight crept through the blinds in thin, quiet lines. I sat up slowly, feeling the weight of the envelope in my handbag, even from across the room. It was strange how something so small could hold so much truth. I dressed without hurry, choosing a soft sweater and comfortable shoes. Then I made my way to the kitchen, fixed a simple breakfast, and ate in silence. By mid-morning, I felt ready to step outside. I slipped the envelope into my bag, locked the door behind me, and started down the sidewalk. The air carried that cool, early-day crispness, the kind that wakes you up in a gentle way. As I passed Mrs. Talbot's house, her curtains moved slightly, and I saw her watching. She raised a hand in a small wave. I returned it, grateful for her quiet presence. My destination wasn't far. Just a few blocks down stood a small corner cafe, one my husband and I used to visit on slow afternoons. I walked inside, ordered a cup of black coffee, and found a seat near the window. The familiarity of the place steadied me. The sound of steaming milk, the clinking of cups, the murmur of conversation, all of it created a soft cushion around my thoughts. I opened the envelope and spread the papers out inside the privacy of the booth. The forged signature, the will, the handwritten note from my husband, the binder summary. Seeing them all together made the situation impossible to dismiss as a misunderstanding. As I sipped my coffee, I heard a voice I recognized, my granddaughter's. I looked up to see Lily standing at the counter, scanning the room. When she spotted me, her face softened with relief. She walked over and slid into the seat across from me. "Grandma, you didn't tell me you were coming out this way." "I just needed some air," I said. Her gaze dropped to the envelope. "Are those?" I nodded. She didn't reach for them. She didn't pressure me. She just folded her hands and waited. After a long moment, I spoke. "Your father and your stepmother made changes to the deed." "I know," she said quietly. "I figured something was wrong." I studied her face, young but not naive. She had my husband's calm eyes, that steady way of waiting for truth without fear. "Do you hate them for it?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, but I'm disappointed. Dad knows better." We sat together for a long while, the morning sunlight warming our side of the cafe. Lily finally reached out, placing her hand gently over mine. "You shouldn't have to handle this alone," she said. "I'm not," I replied. And it was true. For the first time, I didn't feel alone at all. Before we left, she suggested taking a walk. We strolled along the main street, passing the old bookstore, the post office, the little hardware shop where my husband used to buy nails and seeds and things I never fully understood. Each place carried a memory. "There's someone you should talk to," Lily said as we paused outside the florist's shop. "Mom's cousin works in real estate law. She's honest, and she won't take sides." I looked at her. "You'd go with me?" "Every step," she said. We resumed walking, our footsteps easy and unhurried. It struck me then, my son might have signed something he shouldn't have. My daughter-in-law might have orchestrated more than she admitted. But their choices didn't erase the people still standing beside me. The truth was taking shape, and with each step, I felt sturdier, like the old oak tree in my backyard, roots deep, branches ready for whatever wind came next. That afternoon, after Lily drove home to gather a few things, I returned to my house and laid the envelope on the dining table. The room felt different now, not heavier but clearer, as if the air itself understood what was happening. Sunlight drifted through the window, catching dust motes that floated slowly, unbothered. I made myself tea and sat for a moment, listening to the quiet. It wasn't long before another knock sounded at the door. This time it was gentler, almost hesitant. When I opened it, I found Mr. Benton standing on the porch, my late husband's old friend from down the street. His hands were tucked into the pockets of his worn jacket, and his expression held that polite concern men his age carry when they sense something's wrong but don't want to intrude. "Mind if I step in for a minute?" he asked. I smiled softly and guided him inside. He glanced around the living room before settling into the same armchair he had sat in countless times when my husband was alive. He looked at me for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "I saw your son leaving here yesterday," he said slowly. "He didn't look too proud of himself." I let out a quiet breath. "It was a hard conversation," he nodded. "Your husband always told me, if anything got complicated with the house, you were to call someone you trusted. He didn't like leaving loose ends." "He didn't," I said. "Not once. Mr. Benton leaned forward slightly. You still have Donovan's number? I gestured toward the drawer where the old address book sat. I do. Good, he said. He's a fair man. Might be worth giving him a ring. I didn't promise anything, and he didn't push. After a few more minutes of small talk, weather, community gardens, the usual, he stood to leave. As he reached the door, he paused. You're not alone, you know, he said. Your husband surrounded you with people who care. Don't forget that. When he left, the house didn't feel quite so empty. I walked back to the table, glanced at the envelope, and gently tapped the top of it with my fingertips. It was no longer just evidence. It was direction. A little while later, Lily returned, carrying her laptop and a small notebook. She set them on the table and pulled out a chair. Okay, she said, with that determined tone she inherited from her grandfather. Let's line everything up. We spread the papers out in a neat row, the forged signature, the clipped will, the handwritten note, the binder's summary. Lily opened her laptop, typing in quiet bursts as she compared everything, the room filled with the soft clicks of the keyboard, the quiet order of two people working side by side. At one point, she looked up. Grandma, did they ever explain why they rushed the paperwork? No, I said. They only said it was easier. She exhaled, her brow tightening. Easier for who? Neither of us answered. We didn't need to. We worked until the afternoon light shifted into that golden hue that signals the day's slow ending. Papers were organized, notes written, questions listed, all of it forming a quiet map forward. As Lily packed up her laptop, she placed her hand on mine. You're doing the right thing, she said. I nodded, not with doubt, but with certainty settling deeper than before. When she left, I walked to the backyard and stood beneath the oak tree. Its branches swayed gently, and I reached up to touch the rough bark, grounding myself the same way I had done since the day it was planted. The air was cool, the evening gathering around me. My son thought he had taken something from me, but he didn't understand. I wasn't just holding on to a house. I was holding on to truth, and truth was starting to stand on its own 2 feet. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Not urgency, just clarity. I moved through my routine, quietly, steady, letting the house warm up around me. After breakfast, I brought the envelope back to the table and added one more item, a small notebook my husband used to jot reminders in. On the inside cover, written in his neat handwriting, was a short line, always keep a record. It protects the truth. I slipped the notebook into my bag. By mid-morning, Lily arrived again, cheeks flushed from the cool wind outside. She set her things down and poured herself a cup of coffee without asking. Comfortable, familiar. She glanced at my bag by the door. You're ready? She asked. As ready as I can be. We stepped outside, locking the door behind us. The street was quiet, only a few cars passing, a couple walking their dog, the mail carrier making her rounds. Ordinary scenes folding around a not-so-ordinary day. We didn't walk far. Just half a mile down the road stood a small office building with white trim and a bell over the door that rang softly when we stepped inside. The front desk was staffed by a woman who looked up with a polite smile. Do you have an appointment? She asked. No, I said. We're here to see if Mr. Donovan is available. It's important. Her expression softened at his name. He's not in today, but his associate, Miss Harper, is. She handles property disputes and estate matters. Lily glanced at me. I nodded. A few minutes later, a woman in her 40s stepped into the lobby. She introduced herself with a firm handshake and led us back to a quiet office. Her desk was organized, papers in neat stacks, a lamp glowing with warm light. She gestured for us to sit. What brings you in? She asked gently. I reached into my bag and placed the envelope on the desk. I need someone to look at these, I said, and tell me what they mean. She didn't open the envelope immediately. Instead, she watched me for a moment, reading the heaviness behind my words. Then she nodded and began reviewing everything carefully, her eyes scanning each page with measured attention. It didn't take long for her expression to shift, subtle but unmistakable. Concern, then certainty. This signature, she finally said, tapping the forged page, is not legally valid. It's inconsistent with your other documents, and based on your husband's will. She lifted the old, worn page reverently. The property was intended to remain solely in your name. I felt Lily's hand rest lightly on my arm. Miss Harper continued, choosing each word with care. Whoever submitted these forms did so improperly, potentially knowingly. She closed the folder slowly. You have more rights here than they wanted you to believe, and you're not without options. The room stayed quiet for a moment. Not heavy, steady. What would you like to do? She asked. I looked at the papers on her desk, the ones that told two different stories, one rewritten without me, one written long ago with my husband's full heart. I'd like to understand everything, I said. Every step. She nodded. Then I'll walk you through it. For the next half hour, she explained the process, calmly, clearly. I listened, absorbing each detail like pieces of a puzzle finally fitting into place. Lily took notes, her handwriting fast but careful. When Miss Harper finished, she closed the file and sat back. You're standing on solid ground, she said. I breathed in, slow and deep. Solid ground. It had been a long time since I felt that beneath my feet. As we left the office, the bell over the door chimed softly. Outside, the sky had brightened, pale blue stretching wide above us. Lily walked close beside me, matching my pace. Halfway down the sidewalk, she said, "Grandpa would be proud of you." I didn't answer right away. I just looked up at the sky, letting the cool air fill my lungs. He would, and I could almost feel it, his steady hand at my back, guiding me forward. I wasn't done, not by a long shot. On the walk home, the wind had picked up, carrying that subtle bite that comes before colder days. I tightened my coat, but inside I felt steadier than I had in weeks. Lily walked beside me quietly, giving me space to process everything Miss Harper had explained. Each step felt like a small reclaiming of ground, of truth, of myself. When we reached the house, I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The familiar scent of coffee, wood polish, and something faintly floral wrapped around me like an old blanket. I set my bag on the table and exhaled slowly. Lily followed me in. "Do you want to rest for a bit?" she asked. "No," I said. "I want to look at everything again." We sat together at the dining table. I spread the papers out one more time, my husband's will on the left, the forged deed documents on the right, and the notes from Miss Harper in the center. Seeing them all together didn't overwhelm me the way it had before. Now they formed a path instead of a maze. Lily pointed to a detail in the will. "This line here, it means they can't legally remove your name without your consent." "And I never gave it," I said softly. She nodded, her jaw tightening. "That's what makes this serious." I traced a finger along the signature line on the forged document. It still amazed me how something so wrong could be done so quietly. No shouting, no confrontation, just a quiet subtraction of a person's place in their own home. "It's strange," I said. "I always thought betrayal came loudly." Lily tilted her head. "Sometimes quiet cuts deeper." For a while, we didn't speak. I ran my hand along the edge of the table. This table where we'd shared meals, birthdays, long talks about school, arguments made up with dessert afterward. So much life had happened around this wood. And now someone had decided I no longer belonged in the place that held it. But truth was louder than their signatures. Around early afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was my son. "Mom, can we talk later? We want to go over a few things." I set the phone down without answering. Lily raised an eyebrow. "You don't have to pick up." "I know," I said, and for the first time the knowledge wasn't heavy, it was freeing. I stood and walked to the living room bookshelf. On the top shelf sat a photo of my husband standing under the oak tree the year he planted it. He'd written the date on the back in blue pen. I lifted the frame, holding it close for a moment. "You always said the truth stands on its own," I murmured. Back at the table, Lily was organizing the documents into clear categories: will, property records, financial notes, discrepancies. She worked methodically, her brow furrowed in concentration. "You know," she said, not looking up, "this isn't just about a house. They tried to erase you from something you built." "I know," I replied, "and that's why I'm not stepping away." She gave a small, proud smile, the kind that reminded me so much of her grandfather it made my chest ache in the gentlest way. "Miss Harper said she'll draft a formal inquiry letter tonight. She's not wasting time. Neither am I." We finished sorting the papers, and Lily left to head back to campus, hugging me at the door. "Call me if you need anything," she said. "I will." When the house grew quiet again, I made myself another cup of tea and watched the steam rise, curling into shapes that faded almost immediately. I carried it to the living room and sat near the window, the oak tree outside swaying in the afternoon breeze. For years, I'd carried this home, with love, with work, with the quiet endurance that mothers and wives know well. And now, with every step forward, I was carrying something else too. My place, my truth, my name. And I intended to keep all three. That evening, as the sky dimmed into soft blues and purples, I felt a kind of quiet resolve settle over the house. I turned on only one lamp in the living room, letting the warm glow fill the space without overpowering it. The envelope sat on the coffee table, organized now, not chaotic. Every page had a place, and so did I. I made myself dinner, simple roasted vegetables and a piece of baked chicken, then washed the dishes and dried them slowly. My hands moved with a steadiness I hadn't felt in a long time. When everything was cleaned and put away, I sat at the dining table again and opened my husband's old notebook. His handwriting always had a way of grounding me. Firm, certain, thoughtful. I traced a line he'd written years ago. If something ever feels wrong, look closer. Truth leaves footprints. I'd ignored the early signs. Papers moved, conversations cut short, strange hesitations from my son. But I wasn't ignoring anything now. My phone buzzed again. Another message from my son. Mom, please respond. We should clarify what's going on. Clarify. As though all of this were a small misunderstanding. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the binder of home records and flipped to the section where we'd kept receipts for repairs. I remembered the day we replaced the roof. It had rained the entire week before, leaking right into the hallway. My husband had climbed up with the contractor, talking through every board, every shingle. I brought lemonade outside because the heat was unbearable, and he joked that the house was finally getting the attention it deserved. That memory warmed me more than any lamp could. A soft knock came at the door. I walked over slowly, half expecting Lily, but when I opened it, I found no one there. Only a small envelope on the welcome mat. I bent down, picked it up, and stepped back inside before opening it. Inside was a short note in my daughter-in-law's handwriting. Can we talk? We didn't mean to overwhelm you. Overwhelm. Another word that didn't match what they'd actually done. I folded the note carefully and placed it beside my son's unread messages. I wasn't angry. Anger takes too much energy. What I felt was clearer, colder, something sharpened by truth, not emotion. I poured myself a cup of chamomile tea and carried it to the living room. The oak tree outside swayed gently in the dark, its branches brushing the siding like a whisper only I could hear. I sat down and watched the shadows move across the floor. After a long moment, I reached for my handbag, pulled out the envelope with all the documents, and tucked it into a larger zippered pouch. I added my husband's notebook and the binder summary. Everything fit neatly inside. Ready. Miss Harper had asked me earlier if I wanted to move forward with a formal challenge. I hadn't answered then, but now, sitting in the quiet of my own home, a home I'd tended for decades, I felt the answer settle inside me like a stone dropped gently into water. Yes, not out of revenge, not out of anger, but because some lines should never be crossed, some signatures should never be forged, and some names should never be erased. I zipped the pouch closed and placed it beside the front door. Tomorrow, I would take the next step, not to fight, but to reclaim. As I switched off the lamp and made my way to bed, the house around me felt different. Not threatening, not lost, just waiting. Like it trusted I was finally ready to stand for it, and for myself. The next morning arrived quiet and clear, sunlight stretching across the living room floor in long, gentle stripes. I dressed early, choosing a soft blouse and the coat my husband always said brought out my confidence. When I stepped into the kitchen, the house seemed to breathe with me. Steady, sure, familiar. I made coffee, taking a slow sip as I looked around at the space that had held decades of our life. Nothing about it felt uncertain anymore. When I was ready, I picked up the zippered pouch from near the door. It felt solid in my hand, not heavy, just certain. I slipped it into my handbag, locked the door behind me, and stepped out into the cool morning air. The oak tree in the yard rustled softly, its branches catching the light like it was nodding me forward. Lily arrived right on time, pulling up beside the curb with a determined look in her eyes. She got out of the car and hugged me, not saying anything at first. Just holding on. You ready, Grandma? She asked after a moment. I nodded. More than ready. She opened the passenger door for me, and I settled in. As we drove, the town looked the same as it always had. The bakery setting out its pastries, dog walkers on the sidewalk, kids waiting for the school bus. But inside me, everything had shifted. Not through anger, not through fear, but through something deeper. The quiet certainty of a person reclaiming what was always theirs. When we reached the office, the bell above the door chimed softly, just like before. Miss Harper greeted us with a warm nod and ushered us back into her office. Her demeanor was calm but purposeful. "Did you make your decision?" she asked. I placed the pouch on her desk and unzipped it slowly, laying out each document with care. My husband's will, the binder notes, the forged deed pages, the letter she'd written for review. "Yes," I said. "Let's move forward." She gave a small, respectful smile, the kind reserved for people who stand their ground with quiet dignity. She reviewed everything once more, then began drafting the formal challenge. Her fingers moved steadily across the keyboard as she explained each line, each step that would follow. I listened closely, absorbing every word, every reassurance. Lily sat beside me, her hand resting lightly on my arm. Her presence was a steady comfort. When the draft was finished, Miss Harper printed it out. The paper was warm when she slid it across the desk toward me. "With your signature," she said softly, "this begins the process of restoring your rights." I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake. I signed my name, my full name, with a clarity I hadn't felt in a long time. The ink dried quickly, settling into the fibers of the page. My name. Exactly where it belonged. When we stepped outside afterward, the sun had climbed higher, warming the sidewalk. I felt lighter, but not in a fleeting way. Lighter in the way a person feels when they've stepped back into themselves. Lily squeezed my hand. "Grandpa would be proud." "I think so too," I said, looking up at the sky. On the drive home, I watched the town pass by, each familiar landmark grounding me further. When we pulled into my driveway, the oak tree swayed again, steady and rooted, just like I felt now. Inside the house, nothing had changed, yet everything had. The forged papers no longer held power. The silence no longer felt heavy. The house was still mine. And more importantly, so was my place within it. I stood in the living room for a long moment, letting the peace settle around me. This wasn't a victory of shouting or anger. It was a quiet reclamation, the kind that lasts. When Lily hugged me goodbye and drove off, I walked to the backyard and rested my hand on the trunk of the oak tree. The bark was cool against my palm, solid, unwavering. "I'm still here," I whispered, "and I'm not going anywhere." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of the coming season, and for the first time in a long while, I felt completely, undeniably home.